What's going on, YouTube? Culturedog Sam Hatch back here with week 3 of the Halloween challenge for 2019. Trying to do a spooky movie or a Halloween-centric movie. Doesn't have to be a full-on gory horror movie, but whatever. One per each day of the calendar month. So I'm working my way closer and closer to 31. I think we left off at 17 in the last one. And as always, before we get started into the films proper, I got a little bit of extra credit, or as the Crypt Keeper would say, hextra credit. Number whatever you want to call it, because it's TV based. I finally got around to watching Creepshow, which is a Shudder series. I got Shudder just because I like horror movies anyway, so it's nice that there's actually something. I mean, they had a Critters web series, I think 10 minutes a pop for episodes, but you know, this is a little bit more substantial, being a spiritual successor to the George A. Romero films, and a tribute to EC Comics, etc. Greg Nicotero running the show, and it's been a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of audience reception and critical reception. I had pretty much the same results. I watched the first 4 episodes. I think the 5th one just dropped a day or 2 ago. I think it has a Joe Hill story on there, which I'll have to check out. But I love horror anthology shows, so like that's a given. So even if they screwed up the Creepshow concept altogether and just did a good like spooky or like the traditional moral horror tales, that sort of thing. If they just did a show of that and knocked it out of the park, I'd be fine with it. But there's been kind of like fits and starts of it capturing the vibe of the original, especially the original Creepshow, which is untouchable. But every once in a while there's those little stings of bright primary colors and the super aggressive shock markings in the background, and the sort of things they use to great extent in the films, and they're not always used that well here. Sometimes it's just kind of like someone's like, oh yeah, throw in that Creepshow look, but occasionally like it clicks and I'm like, oh yeah, this is like Creepshow worthy. I did enjoy overall like the in between the tales. There's of course bits of comic book pages flying by, so there's all sorts of cool little bits of Easter eggs in there if you decide to pause or try and see what's on the pages. So that was fun. The stories have been a mixed bag so far. The first one had a really interesting one with a haunted dollhouse, which I like, but it just never quite fully coalesced, and like you got a feeling that there was something else coming, like in terms of the story, but that never quite happened. But it was creepy. It was really cool. And the Stephen King adaptation was okay, but it was just kind of felt like super rushed and sloppy at the end. And this is really interesting bit of calculation as horror thrown in there, but I don't think they really explained it that well. And it's just like, oh, here's the end of the episode. Wacky terror. So it's too bad, because the beginning of it seemed to have a little bit of a build up and some. That was one of the ones Nicotero himself directed. A bunch of different directors going on in here. The second one felt a little more Creepshow-y in particular, and of course Jeffrey Combs was in it as a Nazi officer chasing down these guys that if you've seen Dog Soldiers, you know that wartime and werewolves go together, or werewolf women to the SS. They go together nice, but the werewolf effects were like a little, effects overall on the show are really hit or miss. So like some of the stuff in Gray Matter was okay, but then some of the other stuff looks like animatronics at the local Six Flags level, like the creep itself, the main kind of Crypt Keeper character, that's kind of hokey looking, and I was surprised. I do appreciate the amount of practical effects being used, and there's really not much of a reliance on CGI. But then, but the practical effects aren't as good as the practical effects from the 80s. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. Sometimes they're okay. But the best one, so far probably was, in terms of the fun vibe, kind of hearkening back to, the original film and, Stephen King's starring role there. There's a bit with DJ Qualls as, beleaguered divorcee, and he encounters this finger that it gets, you can't really guess where it's going to go. I thought it was going to be some sort of like monkey's paw thing or something like that. It went totally out there, and that sort of thing, like a monster in your pocket, has been done a couple of other times, but just the way it was put together and the kind of fun of it, and the breaking of the fourth wall was pretty cool. Then there was a couple other ones with some very predictable spooky kids on Halloween, and there was a guy that made an evil scarecrow. There was like a side story in that was kind of there for some reason. I think that was a Joe Lansdale and his kids story. So shout out to Joe Lansdale. He's a cool dude. But yeah, in the mixed bag, there was one with Trish Helfer as a murderess stuck in an elevator, and the man in the suitcase was interesting. It's like a kind of gin story that didn't go where I thought it was going to go at first either. Obviously, once you figured out the premise, you're like, oh yeah, guy in a suitcase that coughs up gold coins. Something, yeah. Some form of greed is going to happen. But yeah, it was rare that like it captured the vibe of Creepshow, like the original film and or the sequel. There was a couple little nods to the sequel in there too, which was nice, and it's fun. So I'm gonna keep watching it. Like, so the writing hasn't been completely knocked it out of the park, and then the effects and the vibe hasn't been completely knocked it out of the park. But there's these like little moments, these pockets of where it's doing good. So that's it. I'm gonna give it a chance. As long as it keeps airing, because it's anthology horror. That stuff's my bread and butter. I also finally got around to watching Nosferatu, speaking of Joe Hill, adaptation of his novel. Zachary Quinto in there, and Ashley Cummings, who I'm used to seeing in Miss Fisher's Murder Mystery as Dot. Murder Mysteries, sorry, plural. So it was interesting seeing her as a townie from Haverhill. It was also weird too seeing a giant splash screen with a beautiful drawing of a covered bridge, but it says Haverhill, Massachusetts, because I have hung out there quite a lot, and so it's interesting seeing a place that you kind of hang out in all the time being presented in such a way in a big product. So yeah, it's pretty funny. And filming wise, I think they did a lot of stuff in Rhode Island, so they didn't actually shoot it there, but even some of the like her house, the main character's house in Haverhill looks Haverhill-ish, so I could buy it. I'm waiting for them to go hang out at like Heavenly Donuts or Market Basket, but I've only seen the first episode so far. Pretty strong start, and again, coming hot off the heels of Creepshow, it's like, oh yeah, the effects in this are really good, and just everything's firing all thrusters. Mike Patton doing the music too. How cool is that? Between Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross doing the Watchmen series, which I had mentioned too, but it's not really horror. And then, Mike Patton doing some stuff for Nosferatu. That's pretty cool. Tyler Bates does some of the music for Creepshow, and it's been okay and somewhat effective so far. But yeah, Nosferatu is like, you could tell it's like a higher budget, and not to compare the two, but it was delivering a little bit more than the Creepshow series so far. I'm intrigued to see where it goes. That's one of the few Joe Hill books I haven't read. I saw there was already a nice little Easter egg to Lock and Key and his novel Horns already in the first episode, but looking forward to seeing where it goes from there. Anyway, so on to movies proper. That's my extra credit. I think I watched some documentaries too. I started watching some Alien Covenant featurettes and some more of the Universal Monsters stuff, but we'll get into that. Number 18, we're going Trick or Treat, and I feel bad because I kind of took Michael Dougherty to task in the last episode when I was talking about Terrifier and how it was thirsty, trying to create a beloved Halloween character, and Dougherty is definitely doing that with Sam from Trick or Treat. But that said, Sam is a cool character, and his name is Sam, so that's awesome. And I've always loved Trick or Treat, and it's a movie that has wormed its way into my heart as being a perennial. It's a film I'll watch every Halloween season. So I actually went to visit my friends that used to live in Haverhill, actually. So I was in Massachusetts, and we showed one of our friends that film, and she said the same thing. She's like, I want to watch this every Halloween. It's a fun movie. I loved the kind of playing with the timeline of it, and the almost Tarantino-esque give and take of the narrative structure. There's a couple things that are a little clunky, like the evil, fanged, masked killer being tied to an earlier character. It never quite fired on all thrusters for me. Neither did there's a scene with werewolves, which is interesting. It's a fun little twist, but then you realize it's a bunch of werewolves that have already killed everybody, and there's an extra werewolf that hasn't yet, and then that other character then does their thing, and all the other werewolves turn into werewolves, even though they already did and already killed their victims. But it's like, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense. It's just there just to be cool in a movie, I guess. It's like, oh, time to turn into werewolves again. And do what? Nothing? Oh, yeah, we killed all those people. They're dead already. So that, like, there's, like, weird little elements like that. And then, yeah, the kind of, like, vampiric Phantom of the Opera character. I always felt that should have been its own character. I think it was trying to be a little too clever, connecting that to another character with a completely different modus operandi, and it was like starting to be like, well, what? How many different kind of like methodologies and you know, I don't know, does this one character have? So that never worked for him, but everything else was great. Brian Cox is great in it, and just, you know, the tales, it's great because it's an anthology film, and I freaking love anthology films, but it mixes in the different, you know, interweaves the different tales instead of just going, here's tale number 2, here's tale number 3. And yeah, it does a really good job. It's really well put together. And so, yeah, there's just those maybe 2 quibbles aside. It's still a kick-ass film, one of my favorites. So had to watch Trick or Treat again. Good stuff. Number 18. Number 19. Big fan of this. Probably still contender for my favorite film of the year, alongside a few others. But Ari Aster's Midsommar. And I'm looking to import a copy of the director's cut. I missed the director's cut when it came back into theaters. I was just super busy around the time it happened and wasn't able to run out and catch it. But last I heard, there was still going to be some European Blu-ray and maybe 4K releases of the director's cut. I know there was at least a UK one, maybe an Italian one. This could keep changing as the days progress. So I gotta, you know, figure that out and import one of those suckers, because I think they're out already. So, but I really want to see the director's cut. But that's okay, because the theatrical cut of Midsommar is fantastic, and we wanted to show a friend of ours the film. And yeah, so and then another friend of a friend came over, and it was really cool. We all hung out and watched it, and everybody was like really getting into the dynamics, like the social dynamics of the film. And you know, it's interesting just how kind of like funny it is. Not funny in a straight out total comedy way, but in terms of just the dynamics of these characters and how clueless some of the characters are, and how, you know, you the viewer can put a bunch of these pieces together as the story's progressing, and you know, it's kind of like hilarious how you know, out of touch everybody else in the film is, except for maybe a couple key characters. But oh man, I mean, from the gut punch of the opening to just, oh man, I love the type of ending this film has. There's been a few lately, like The Witch and that sort of thing, you know, where yeah, it's just not your traditional Hollywood style storytelling. But yeah, the camera work is fantastic. It looks gorgeous on Blu-ray. Love to see it in 4K. But yeah, it looked great. The sound is amazing, and I love the kind of, you know, diegetic music, and like how oh yeah, that's a score, and then all of a sudden you see all the players of the music just show up on screen. You're like, oh snap, that's like source music. And yeah, it's just such an awesome mix of, you know, like levity, intensity, and like overpowering grief carrying over from Aster's Hereditary. And just the fact that it was all balls out in the blazing sun for most of the film. Awesome stuff. And it's one of those things that'll keep you talking about, you know, what it all means, and so much fun. And all the imagery, the details of the paintings in the film, and so much to kind of keep grabbing, so many juices to be suckled out of this sucker. So, and went over like gangbusters. So it was great watching that. Then we followed that up with a 1-2 punch of, let's throw on Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. And yeah, that was a late night, because that's a rather long film. Second time, came away with a few more details I hadn't noticed the first time, so that was nice. Still some of the same quibbles, the RAF stuff, like, still seems like it's shoehorned in there so hard, and like so many of the things that are extraneous to the original source, you know, material about the dance academy and the matriarchy of the dance academy, like that is the bread and butter of the story, and everything that like they kind of piled on top to make it more art house, or make, yeah, I don't know, it seems to creak a little bit, even as it's pretty interesting, and there's some, I guess, some thematic juice to be dragged from it. But yeah, the Joseph character is, I don't know, and the execution of it is, still a little wonky and somewhat unnecessary, but there are some moments that really shine, and I do love Tom York's score. I mean, you can't touch the original Goblin, and of course he didn't even attempt to, and his score definitely works well with Luca Guadagnino's kind of film, which is not a celebration of primary colors like Dario Argento's film. It's very, I said before, it's kind of cliched because it's like super drab Berlin from the 70s, a divided Berlin, and it's almost comically aware of that because there's one scene that takes place years after the events of the film, and of course it just looks like a normal Berlin, like Berlin would look. But because it's in the 70s and it's a divided Berlin, like it just imbues the atmosphere with this kind of shrouded weather, and everything's just so disgusting and rainy and putrid, and it's just kind of comically overdone a little bit, but it is gorgeous, and I don't know, and I love some of the kick of the wrap up, but I don't know. I'll keep watching it a few more times. It's never gonna unseat my love for the original Dario Argento, but there are a few things that kind of grate on my nerves a little bit when I watch it, but a lot of it kicks ass. So, anyways, Suspiria, Luca Guadagnino's remake. Watch that again. Then I went back old school. I'm still digging through my Universal Monsters Blu-ray collection that I had picked up, maybe last year or earlier in the year. And then, foolishly, I should have held out because Amazon had a one-day sale of that complete collection of all the Universal Monster films, all the sequels, etc. I think that was like $70 or something, which is a ridiculously good price, but the timing was wrong, and so whatever. But I watched The Mummy, which is always one of my favorites. It's very, Dracula-esque in terms of story structure and the main character. And it's funny too how just kind of growing up, a lot of people didn't really understand the mummy or the creature of the mummy. Like, it just filled everybody's minds with imagery of Johnny Quest mummies, just kind of lumbering around and killing everyone. And the fully bandaged ambulatory mummy is in like the very beginning of the film, and it just kind of goes for a walk. And that's it. And the rest of it is just Boris Karloff, like, being pretty charming. And he's a lovable rogue. He might go a little bit too far into some of his methodology. But I mean, the woman he's after, we're supposed to have this like vested interest in her budding relationship with another character, but it's just like whipped together so quickly. I'm like, I don't care. I don't know. Maybe she should hook up with this mummy dude. So he's a sympathetic villain, but he kind of just pushed the boundaries a little bit too much. But it's awesome. I mean, in the late 70s, early 80s, like King Tut fever in particular was like off the charts. So, I don't know. It just makes me nostalgic for those times. And I just love Egyptology. It makes me want to listen to some Nile albums and just, I don't know, crank up some metal. Anyways, The Mummy, it's awesome. Then I had to follow it up with number 22. Sorry, 22. The Wolfman, especially after watching the Joe Johnston remake last week. I love The Wolfman and all the different kind of sequels that came out of it. And Lon Chaney Jr. is he's such an interesting character. One, it's like next to Claude Rains, he's like huge. It's so like almost impossible to believe that he's the son of Claude Rains because he's just this lumbering beast of a man. And then he's just kind of rolling into this town and just not very suave and just looking at hot chicks and telescopes and he's like on the edge of like a little creepy, but I don't know, it's just such a fun movie, and Bela Lugosi's great there in a small-ish role, and it's great. It from 1941, so film scores were an accepted evil at that point, so it has a kind of great lush sweeping score, and it's just a lot of fun. So number 20, Deuce, The Wolfman. Then, number 23, we rocked the Spookies. Yeah, Spookies. I fired up the Laserdisc of Spookies. If you've never seen it, it's an interesting mid-80s, I think it was 86, it was officially released. A weird mashup of a couple projects. Basically, it was like a movie called Twisted Souls, I think it was. And one, it's cool because it's less the house, the estate that it was filmed at is less than 2 hours from my house, so I can go visit it sometime. But it was like this kind of haunted house, fun house kind of movie with a bunch of partiers like encountering this creepy mansion and like just about every possible kind of threat or monster along the way. And then, and that was done by a handful of people. And then yet another director was brought on board to inject all these other elements in it. So it plays as awkward and disjointed as you would imagine because, different actors and all these different things and they don't really ever intersect. So the story's just kind of a fever dream. But that said, it almost makes it more akin to the stranger vibe of an Italian film, like not really giallo, but like a later, full bore, Bava or Argento film, almost as weird as something like Demons. The music is occasionally effective. It's not bad. It moves for one. Surprisingly, not a lot of gratuitous nudity, but there is a hefty amount of gratuitous violence, and the monsters and the creatures. It's not just like the typical like siege in a mausoleum or like siege in some sort of old plantation house kind of picture. It just keeps evolving and getting weirder. But basically, there's a sorcerer in this place that never really connects with all these other characters, and he's this kind of like Dr. Freeze-ish guy. He's got this bride that he's keeping entombed and like keeping her alive with the aid of ensnaring other people, especially using Ouija boards, etc. And and some of the partier characters are totally over the top and not really even that humorous, but trying to be humorous. Such a weird mix of vibes and obviously just narrative structure is completely bazonkers. There's a bit with a little kid. You're like, what is this going to be, like a Phantasm movie or something like that? And his story just completely goes nowhere. It's just thrown in there just to get thrown in there. There's this like enchanted cat kind of werecat creature guy. But yeah, the monsters they all encounter, like, traditional like kind of Grim Reaper type stuff. There's like a evil Spider Woman, and even when there is something that you're like, I kind of seen that, they'll even throw in some other weirder effect, like some sort of lightning effect or something on top of it, just to kind of keep upping the ante. And it's got an ingenuity to it that I appreciate. It's not really scary or effective in building any tension, especially because sometimes it's the special effects are really good. It's just that they didn't know how to light them properly, that they end up looking a little hokey or whatever. Because sometimes when they're shot properly, they look damn good. And then another scene, you're like, they didn't really light that well. And that kind of just looks like a big heaping pile of latex. The best part, though, is there's this group of monsters called the Muckmen. But they're basically fart mummies. There's these kind of like oozy mummy characters. But they make these fart sounds all during this attack, which apparently was like some sort of like producer's idea. Amazing stuff. Spookies. I mean, there's no real kind of characters that you're really gunning for, and there's like a ridiculously long like outrun the zombies like kind of switcheroo bit towards the end, and you're like, dear God, it's just this. Well, it's like the most boring football game ever, except with zombies versus this one damsel, and it's like, dodge left, dodge right, keep running, turn, spin around, and it just keep going, but like. It's got a pretty funky jam playing over it, at least. If you ever trip across it on VHS or Laserdisc, maybe check it out. Spookies. 23. We're going to stop there this week. I know I think I only did 6 movies proper, but we'll do that so that way next week I can have a full week, and we'll see what other kind of extra credit I can whip up. But anyways, that's it. Horror movies. Hopefully you guys are watching some cool stuff. Let me know what you're checking out below, and I'll catch you guys next week for the final wrap-up. Cheers.